I sold the car I'd rebuilt with my own hands just to give her the wedding she dreamed of. She said I was her forever. She kissed me like she meant it. 3 months later, she used the same money to file for divorce. Not a word, just a lawyer's email and silence. I still wake up some nights wondering if any of it was ever real. The morning of our wedding, I stood in that little garden in Tagbilaran watching Reynold walk toward me in her white dress, and I swear I felt my heart restart after years of being dead. The fabric caught the Philippine breeze like something out of a movie, and for a moment I forgot I was 64 years old, forgot about the gray in my beard and the ache in my lower back from sleeping on cheap hotel mattresses. "Alan," she whispered as she reached me, her eyes wet with tears that caught the morning light. "I never thought I'd find someone who'd love me this much." Her voice trembled with what I believed was pure emotion, the kind that can't be faked or rehearsed. Her mother, Nane Luz, was sobbing in the front row, clutching a rosary that had probably blessed 3 generations of her family, nodding at me like I was some kind of answered prayer sent from Australia to save her daughter from a life of struggle. Even little Mika, Reynold's 10-year-old daughter, was beaming at us from behind her grandmother's shoulder, her gap-toothed smile making my chest tight with a love I'd never expected to feel for a child who wasn't my blood. The priest spoke in a mix of English and Bisaya, his words floating over the small crowd of relatives and neighbors who'd gathered to witness what I thought was the beginning of my real life. But all I heard was Reynold's voice when she said, "I do, my love. Forever and always." The words hit me like a physical force, like someone had reached into my chest and restarted an engine that had been sitting cold for years. I thought about my old Ford Falcon sitting in some stranger's driveway back in Perth, sold 3 weeks earlier to pay for this moment, to fund the flights and the ceremony and the new life we'd build together, and I'd never felt more certain about any decision in my 64 years of making mostly wrong ones. I've never been more sure about anything. I told her as we kissed, tasting salt from her tears and thinking this was what happiness felt like when it finally finds you after you'd given up looking for it. The months leading up to that day felt like a miracle I didn't deserve, like winning a lottery I'd never bought a ticket for. We'd met during COVID in some online language exchange group that I'd joined out of pure desperation more than curiosity. I'd started learning Tagalog sitting in my empty house in Perth with nothing but time and regret for company, my divorce from Sarah finalized but still echoing through rooms that felt too big for one person. My marriage had ended 5 years earlier, not with fireworks or screaming matches, but with the quiet realization that we'd become strangers sharing a mortgage and a last name, polite roommates who'd forgotten why we'd ever thought we belonged together, no kids to complicate things, no dramatic affairs or financial disasters, just 23 years that faded into paperwork and separate bedrooms and the kind of silence that makes you forget you used to know how to laugh. When Reynold first appeared on my computer screen during one of those video calls, her face pixelated by the poor internet connection in her small town, I felt something I'd forgotten existed, something I thought had died with my 40s. "Your pronunciation is terrible." She laughed, covering her mouth with her hand in that way Filipino women do when they're trying to be polite about your failures. "But your heart is good. I can tell from your eyes." She was teaching English online to support her family, working from her small house in Bohol, while raising Mika alone after her ex-husband had walked out when their daughter was barely learning to walk. "Men here," she said during one of our late-night calls, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper people use when they're sharing their deepest disappointments. They promise everything and leave nothing but broken dreams and unpaid bills. I found myself staying up until 3 in the morning just to catch her during her lunch break, calculating time zones and setting alarms like a teenager with his first crush, feeling ridiculous but alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "You're different, Alan," she'd tell me, her voice soft through my laptop speakers. "You listen when I talk about my dreams instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. You care about what I want, not just what I can give you." 8 months of video calls turned into plane tickets and promises, and a leap of faith that felt like jumping off a cliff while hoping someone had put a net below. When I finally flew to meet her, standing nervous in that tiny airport in Bohol with flowers I'd bought in Manila wilting in the humid air, she ran into my arms like we'd been apart for decades instead of continents, her body small and warm against my chest, smelling like sampaguita and hope. "You came," she sobbed against my shirt, her tears soaking through the fabric I'd chosen specifically because I thought it made me look younger, more vital than my pension and gray hair suggested. You actually came. I was so scared you'd change your mind. Her town felt like stepping into a postcard I'd never thought I'd be part of. All narrow streets and colorful houses with laundry hanging from windows like prayer flags, roosters crowing at dawn, and the constant hum of motorbikes carrying entire families through dust that tasted like adventure. Reynold showed me everything with the pride of someone sharing her most precious secrets, her hand always in mine. As we walked past neighbors who waved and called out greetings in languages I was learning to love, even though I understood maybe one word in 10. "This is the church where I pray for you every Sunday," she said, holding my hand as we walked past the old stone building with its bell tower that had been watching over her family for generations. "And this is where Mika learned to ride her bike, right here where we're standing." Every story felt like an invitation into a life I'd never dared to imagine for myself, a chance to matter to people who didn't know about my failures or my mediocre career, fixing other people's cars, or the way my first marriage had slowly dissolved like sugar in rain. Nane Luz cooked for me every night, piling my plate with adobo and rice and vegetables I couldn't name, watching me eat with the satisfaction of a woman who knew that feeding someone was the first step in claiming them as family. "You have a good face," she told me in broken English that somehow conveyed more warmth than perfect grammar ever could. "My daughter, she needs a good man after so much disappointment." Mika would sit next to me during dinner, practicing her English by asking about cars and Perth weather and whether Australia really had animals that could kill you, her curiosity endless and charming. "Will you teach me to drive when I'm older?" she asked one night, and something in my chest just melted like ice cream in the Philippine heat, because I'd never been anyone's father figure before, never had someone look at me like I might have answers worth learning. My mate Colin called from Perth during my second week there, his voice crackling through an international connection that made him sound like he was calling from another planet. "You sure about this, mate?" he asked, and I could hear the concern he was trying to dress up as casual curiosity. "She's lovely from what you've told me, but it's all happening pretty fast, don't you think?" I watched Reynold hanging laundry in the yard outside the window, humming some Filipino song I didn't recognize while the sunset painted her hair the color of burnished copper, her movements graceful and unself-conscious, in a way that made me feel like I was witnessing something sacred. "Colin," I said, trying to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. "I've been lonely for 5 years, properly lonely, the kind where you talk to the television just to hear conversation in your own house. I'm not getting any younger, and she makes me feel like I matter again. Like I'm not just marking time until my pension runs out." He sighed the way old friends do when they see you making a mistake but love you too much to say it directly. "Just be careful, yeah? Love can make us blind to things we should see coming, especially when we want it as badly as you do." But I didn't want to be careful anymore. I'd been careful my whole life. And where had it gotten me? An empty house and a divorce settlement, and the growing certainty that I'd missed something essential about how to be happy. "She's not like other women, Colin," I said, watching her laugh at something Mika had whispered in her ear. "She sees something in me that I thought was dead and buried." What I didn't tell him was that I was already planning to propose, already calculating how much I'd need to sell my restored Ford Falcon for, already imagining a future where I mattered to people who needed me as much as I needed them. After we married in that garden ceremony that felt like something out of a fairy tale I'd never believed in, something shifted in ways I told myself were normal adjustments to married life, but felt more like a door closing somewhere I couldn't reach. "I'm just tired, love," Reynold would say when I asked why she seemed distant, why her smiles felt rehearsed instead of spontaneous, why she flinched slightly when I touched her shoulder while she was working on her laptop. "Teaching online is exhausting, and the internet has been terrible lately. My students get frustrated when the connection cuts out during lessons." She'd disappear into the bedroom for hours, claiming she had classes or lesson planning or administrative work that required complete concentration, but I'd hear her whispering on phone calls in rapid Bisaya, her voice taking on tones I'd never heard during our courtship, urgent and secretive and somehow angry. When I'd knock on the door to bring her coffee or ask if she wanted dinner, she'd call out, "Just give me a few more minutes, Alan. This is important work stuff." Those few minutes turned into entire evenings where I'd sit alone in the living room, watching Filipino variety shows I didn't understand while the sound of her muffled conversations leaked through the walls like smoke. The money requests started small, and seemed so reasonable that I felt guilty for even noticing them, like a man counting pennies while his family needed basic necessities. "Nane needs help with her blood pressure medicine," Reynold said one morning, showing me a text message on her phone written in Tagalog that I couldn't read but had learned to trust. "It's only 2,000 pesos, maybe 50 Australian dollars. Of course I helped. That's what family does, what husbands do when their wives' mothers need medication to stay alive. Then it was Mika's school fees, because the public school was overcrowded, and the private one would give her better opportunities. Then it was a broken roof at her cousin's house that needed fixing before the rainy season turned their home into a swimming pool. Then it was a new phone because hers was too slow for teaching Alan, and my students are complaining about the video quality during lessons." Each time she'd hug me afterward with what felt like genuine gratitude, her body warm against mine, saying, "You're so good to us, my love. I don't know what we'd do without you, how we'd survive without your generous heart." But when I suggested opening a joint bank account to make transfers easier, to streamline the process of helping her family, her face changed in a way that made my stomach drop, like I'd said something offensive without realizing it. "Don't you trust me, Alan?" she asked, and something in her voice, a sharpness that hadn't been there during our courtship, made me feel like I'd stepped on a landmine disguised as normal conversation. "Of course I trust you," I said quickly, backpedaling like a man who'd accidentally insulted someone's mother. "I just thought it might be more convenient, easier for both of us." She turned away from me, her shoulders tense in a way that suggested I'd revealed something ugly about my character. "If you trusted me, you wouldn't need to control our money like I'm some kind of child who can't handle her own finances." I felt like I was walking on broken glass in my own marriage, constantly apologizing for trying to be practical, for suggesting solutions to problems I thought we were solving together. Her cousin Babeth started showing up more often, always arriving unannounced with that particular Filipino sense of family entitlement that I was learning to navigate, always whispering with Reynold in corners of the house, their voices dropping to urgent murmurs whenever I entered the room. "What's Babeth saying?" I'd ask, trying to sound casual instead of paranoid. She seemed upset about something. Reynold would wave her hand dismissively, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Girl talk, nothing important. You wouldn't understand anyway. It's all family drama from before you came." But their eyes would follow me like they were discussing something I wasn't supposed to understand, measuring my reactions, calculating something I couldn't name but felt in my gut like approaching weather. The morning that shattered everything started exactly like the dozens that had come before it, with me trying to be the helpful husband, the useful addition to a family that had been complete without me. I'd gone to the wet market early to buy fish for lunch, navigating the maze of vendors and hanging meat with the awkward determination of a foreigner who wanted to belong, practicing my basic Tagalog on women who smiled patiently at my pronunciation while selling me whatever I pointed at. The vendor I'd grown familiar with, an older woman with gold teeth who'd grown protective of me in the way Filipinos adopt hopeless foreigners, looked at me with something like pity in her eyes that made my chest tighten with anticipation of bad news. "Sir Alan," she said carefully, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening, "your wife was here last night with another man, young guy, good-looking. I thought maybe you were divorced already. That's why I didn't think to mention it before." The bag of fish slipped from my hands, scattering across the wet concrete like silver evidence of my stupidity, and suddenly I couldn't breathe properly, like someone had punched me in the solar plexus. "What did you say?" My voice came out as a croak, barely human. She looked uncomfortable now, like she regretted speaking, like she'd accidentally stepped into a family drama she didn't want to be part of. "Maybe I was wrong, sir. Maybe it was someone else who looks like your wife. Sometimes we old women, we see things that aren't really there." But her eyes said she wasn't wrong, said she knew exactly what she'd seen and was trying to be kind by giving me room to pretend otherwise. I ran home through streets that suddenly felt hostile and foreign, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest, practicing what I'd say, how I'd ask her to explain without sounding crazy or jealous, or like the suspicious old fool I was probably being. The house was empty in a way that felt different from her usual absences, empty like a tomb instead of empty like someone had stepped out for groceries. Her clothes were gone. Her laptop that had become an extension of her body was gone. Her teaching materials, her books, her collection of cheap jewelry from the local market, all gone. Even the framed photo from our wedding day that had sat on the dresser like proof that we'd actually been happy once, gone like it had never existed at all. The closet looked like a mouth with all its teeth pulled out, hangers swaying slightly in the breeze from the electric fan like skeletal wind chimes. I called her phone and got a voicemail message in Tagalog that I'd never bothered to learn because I'd assumed we'd always be together to translate for each other. I called again, and again. Each ring felt like a small death, each trip to voicemail another confirmation that something terrible had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. The caretaker next door, a kind woman who'd always waved when she saw me watering plants or hanging laundry, saw me standing in the yard looking lost and approached with the careful gentleness people use around accident victims. "Sir Alan," she said softly, "your wife left this morning with a suitcase and many bags. A man was helping her load everything into a jeepney." The ground felt like it was tilting under my feet, like the whole world had shifted 15 degrees while I was buying fish and planning lunch. "Did she say where she was going?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be another small knife in my chest. The woman shook her head, her expression genuinely sympathetic. "She said to tell you she'd contact you soon, that everything would be explained later." That evening, sitting alone in our empty bedroom surrounded by the ghosts of conversations and promises that now felt like lies, my phone chimed with an email notification that made my hands shake as I opened it. The subject line read, "Marriage Dissolution Notice, Prescott divided by Santos case," in the kind of official font that governments use when they're destroying your life efficiently. I stared at those words until they burned into my vision like looking directly at the sun, trying to make them mean something other than what they obviously meant. The lawyer's name was Morales, and his email was clinical, professional, cold as surgery performed without anesthesia. "Your spouse has retained our services to initiate dissolution proceedings under the applicable international provisions of Philippine family law. Please review the attached documents and respond within 30 days through licensed legal counsel." Attached were papers I couldn't understand, legal language that felt like a foreign language even though it was supposedly in English, pages of clauses and subclauses that seemed designed to make divorce sound like a business transaction. At the bottom, a line that cut through me like a blade dipped in acid. Petitioner requests equitable division of marital assets acquired during the brief union, including but not limited to liquid assets transferred from respondents' Australian accounts. They wanted half of everything I'd brought to the marriage, including the money from selling my car, the money I'd transferred to help with her family's endless emergencies, the money I'd thought was an investment in our shared future. I read that email 17 times, counting each read like rosary beads, hoping the words would change or reveal some hidden meaning that didn't feel like complete betrayal. But there was nothing there except legal machinery grinding my heart into dust, nothing except the dawning realization that I'd been played by an expert who knew exactly which buttons to push and when to push them. I'd rebuilt that car from absolutely nothing. Found her rusting in a junkyard outside Perth in 2018 when I was still married to Sarah but already dead inside, looking for projects that might give me a reason to get out of bed on weekends. She was a 1972 Ford Falcon that most people would have scrapped for parts, her body eaten by rust and neglect, her engine seized from years of sitting in the weather like a mechanical corpse. But I saw something in her lines, something worth saving. The kind of classic Australian muscle that reminded me of my father in the garage where he'd taught me that love meant taking broken things and making them whole again. I spent 3 years in my garage, every weekend, every free evening after work, bringing her back to life bolt by bolt, replacing everything that time and weather had destroyed. New engine that purged like a contented cat, fresh paint the color of sunrise over the Indian Ocean, chrome that reflected the sky like a mirror, interior restored with leather that smelled like possibility and second chances. Sarah used to complain about the noise, the smell of motor oil that followed me into the house, the way I'd come to bed with grease under my fingernails and dreams of carburetors in my head. "It's just an old car, Alan," she'd say with the exasperation of someone who'd never understood the satisfaction of creating beauty from wreckage. "Why can't you find a hobby that doesn't take over the whole bloody garage?" But that car wasn't just metal and rubber to me. She was proof that broken things could be beautiful again, that patience and love could resurrect what others had given up on, that a man with time and determination could build something lasting in a world that seemed designed to tear everything apart. When I decided to propose to Reynold, sitting in my empty house 6 months after meeting her online, I knew I'd have to sell the Falcon to afford the wedding she deserved, The flights back and forth between Australia and the Philippines. The new life we'd build together that would require cash more than nostalgic cars. The day I handed over the keys to the buyer, a young guy with eager eyes who promised to take good care of her, who understood what she represented, I felt like I was trading my past for my future in the most romantic gesture I'd ever made. "She's an absolute beauty," he said, running his hand along her hood with the reverence she deserved. "You sure you want to sell? I mean, she's obviously got sentimental value." I thought about Reynold's face when I'd told her about my plan during one of our video calls, how she'd cried and said, "You'd do that for me? You'd give up something so precious just to make our dreams come true?" I thought I was making the ultimate romantic gesture, proving my love was stronger than my attachment to things, showing her that she mattered more than anything else in my life. "Yeah," I told the buyer, shaking hands on a deal that felt like signing up for the best adventure of my life. "I'm sure. She needs to fund something more important now, something that'll last longer than any car ever could." If I'd known I was literally paying for my own divorce, funding the legal fees that would dissolve our marriage and divide the assets I'd liquidated to prove my love, would I have done it differently? The question eats at me some nights when sleep won't come and I'm staring at the ceiling of my rented room in Dumaguete, remembering the sound of her engine purring in the driveway, the satisfaction of turning the key and hearing 3 years of work respond with mechanical perfection. After a week of silence that felt like solitary confinement, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore, couldn't stand not knowing if she was safe or sorry or planning to come back with an explanation that would make everything make sense again. I wrote her an email, not angry or demanding or accusatory, just asking for the truth I thought I deserved after 3 months of marriage and 8 months of what I'd believed was love. "Reynold," I wrote, deleting and rewriting each word a dozen times, "I don't understand what happened between us. We were happy, or at least I thought we were building something real together. If I did something wrong, if I hurt you somehow without realizing it, please just tell me what it was. I love you. I love Mika. I thought we were creating a family, building a future that would last longer than both of us. Please, just help me understand why you left without saying goodbye, why you disappeared like I was some kind of stranger instead of your husband." I stared at that message for an hour before hitting send, reading it over and over, wondering if I sounded pathetic or desperate or like the broken old man I was starting to feel like. Maybe I was both pathetic and desperate, but I was also human, and humans deserve explanations when their worlds collapse without warning. 3 days passed like years, then 4, then 5, each one longer than the last, each one confirming what I didn't want to accept. On the 5th day, my phone chimed with a response that made my heart race until I realized it wasn't from Reynold's email address, wasn't from the woman I'd married and loved and trusted with my future. It was from some generic Gmail account I'd never seen before, the kind people create when they want to deliver bad news without consequences. The message had no greeting, no signature, no acknowledgement that we'd ever shared a bed or made promises or stood in front of her family and God to pledge ourselves to each other. Just one line that felt like a slap across my face. "You got what you wanted. I got what I needed. Don't contact me again." I read those words until they blurred together, trying to find some hidden meaning, some crack where the woman I'd married might still be hiding behind this cold stranger who'd replaced her. But there was nothing there except calculation, numbers on a balance sheet, the emotional temperature of a business transaction concluded successfully. That night, I found myself sitting on the couch at 2 a.m, watching our wedding video on my phone like a man studying evidence of a crime he couldn't quite believe had happened. There she was, saying "I do," with tears in her eyes that had seemed so real, promising forever and always with a voice that trembled with what I'd interpreted as overwhelming emotion. I watched her kiss me like she meant it, watched myself beam like a man who'd finally figured out the secret to happiness after 64 years of trial and error. The man in that video had no idea he was an actor in someone else's script, playing a role he'd never auditioned for, delivering lines written by someone who saw him as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of love. I watched it again and again, until the battery died and the screen went black, leaving me alone with the sound of roosters crowing outside a window in a country that had stopped feeling like home and started feeling like the scene of a crime I'd participated in without knowing it. The next morning, I walked to the barangay hall to find out if our marriage had even been legally real, or if that too was part of an elaborate performance designed to separate me from my money and my dignity. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who seemed genuinely sympathetic to my obvious distress, pulled up our records on an ancient computer that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. "Yes, sir," she said after several minutes of typing and clicking. "You were legally married on March 15th. The documents were filed properly. Everything is official and binding under Philippine law." Something in me had hoped it was all fake, that I could dismiss the whole thing as an elaborate con that didn't really count, that didn't make me a divorced man for the second time in my life. But there it was, official and binding, my signature next to hers on papers that proved I'd been someone's husband for exactly 93 days before being discarded like packaging around a gift she'd already opened and found useful. "Can you tell me about divorce laws here?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would hurt like everything else about this experience. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd rather not be the one to explain how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered. "Sir, the Philippines doesn't allow divorce for Filipino citizens under normal circumstances. It's a Catholic country, very traditional about marriage. But if you're a foreign national, there are provisions for dissolution if your home country recognizes it and if certain conditions are met." The pieces clicked together, with the sound of a trap snapping shut, each revelation making me feel more stupid for not seeing it coming. The prenup we'd signed, the papers I'd barely read because I trusted her completely and didn't want to seem like a suspicious old man worried about protecting assets from the woman he loved. They'd included an Australian clause that would let her file for divorce using my citizenship as leverage. She'd married me knowing exactly how she'd unmake it, planned the beginning with the ending already written, every "I love you" and tear and moment of apparent intimacy calculated to get her to this predetermined destination. "Sir?" the clerk asked gently. "Are you all right? You look pale." I realized I'd been standing there for several minutes, staring at nothing, processing the magnitude of how completely I'd been played. "I'm fine," I lied, the way men my age always lie when we're anything but fine. "Thank you for your help." Walking back through town, I saw the places where we'd made memories that I'd thought were real but now felt like movie sets designed to create the illusion of authenticity. The church where she'd claimed to pray for me every Sunday, where we'd lit candles together and I'd felt connected to something larger than my own loneliness. The market where she'd taught me to haggle in Bisaya, laughing when I mispronounced words and making me feel charming instead of foolish. The bench where we'd shared ice cream with Mika on Sunday afternoons, planning our future like people who actually had one, talking about sending her to university and maybe having more children if God blessed us with them. Everything looked the same in the harsh afternoon light, but it felt like walking through a movie set after filming Wrapped, all facade with nothing behind it, constructed to serve a purpose that had nothing to do with the emotions I'd invested in these locations. The ice cream vendor recognized me and waved, calling out in English, "Where is your beautiful wife today, sir?" I couldn't bring myself to answer, just waved back and kept walking, carrying the weight of knowing that beautiful wife had never really existed except in my imagination and her carefully constructed performance. Now I live in a small rental apartment in Dumaguete, 3 hours south of the life I thought I was building, in a city where nobody knows my story, and I can pretend to be just another expat, retiree enjoying the tropical weather, instead of a man fleeing the wreckage of his own gullibility. The apartment is clean and quiet, furnished with the kind of generic pieces that could belong to anyone, which suits me fine because I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's husband, someone's provider, someone's answer to problems I didn't create but volunteered to solve. My mornings are coffee and silence, no voices from the next room planning the day, no coordination required with anyone else's schedule or needs or expectations. Some days I like the peace, the simplicity of making decisions that only affect me. Other days it feels like punishment for believing in something that was never there, like solitary confinement in a cell of my own making. I've stopped checking my phone every few minutes, stopped jumping at email notifications like a man expecting news that might change everything, stopped hoping she might have second thoughts or develop a conscience, or remember that she once promised to love me forever and always. The absence doesn't hurt less exactly, but it hurts differently now. Like an old injury you learn to work around instead of a fresh wound that stops you in your tracks every time you move wrong. My neighbor here is an old American expat named Jim who's been married to his Filipina wife for 15 years, who waters his plants every evening while she cooks dinner inside their small house. They're routine, comfortable, and genuine in a way that makes me both envious and cautious. Sometimes he waves at me from his garden, and I wonder if he knows something I never figured out, some secret to making this work that doesn't involve selling your most precious possessions for love that was never real. The trick, he told me one evening when I was sitting on my balcony drinking beer and trying not to think about Reynold, is knowing the difference between a woman who needs you and a woman who wants to be with you. Took me 2 wives and a bankruptcy to figure that out, but once you learn to see the difference, it's pretty obvious. I nodded like I understood, but I'm still learning to distinguish between love and transaction, between partnership and performance, between someone who sees you as a person and someone who sees you as a solution to problems you didn't know you were being hired to solve. My first wife here, Jim continued, pulling weeds with the methodical patience of a man who'd found his peace. She was beautiful and sweet and always needed money for something important. Emergency after emergency, you know. My second wife, she had her own job, her own money, her own life. She wanted to share it with me, not replace it with me. Big difference, mate. I don't want pity from anyone who hears this story, don't want to be seen as another foolish old white man who got taken by a pretty young woman who was smarter and more desperate than he was generous and lonely. I don't want revenge either, though I'd be lying if I said I never fantasized about showing up at her door with proof of what she'd done, making her face the man she'd used and discarded like empty packaging. But what would be the point of confrontation? She knows exactly what she did. She planned it carefully, executed it perfectly, and moved on without looking back because to her, I was never a person worth considering, just a resource worth exploiting. The woman I fell in love with, the one who cried when I told her about selling my car, who promised forever and always with tears in her eyes, she was never real in the first place. I was in love with a performance designed to extract maximum value from my loneliness and hope, and the performance is over now. The actress has moved on to her next role, probably with her next victim already lined up and researched and ready to be harvested. What hurts more than the betrayal is realizing that while I was learning to love someone who didn't exist, I forgot how to love and respect myself. I gave up pieces of who I was trying to become, who she needed me to be, molding myself into the shape of her requirements like clay in the hands of a sculptor who saw me as raw material rather than a finished person worth loving as I was. Now I'm stuck figuring out what's left when you subtract someone else's expectations from your own identity, trying to remember who Alan Prescott was before he became the old Australian man who'd do anything for a beautiful Filipina wife who never really wanted him at all. The truth I've had to swallow is harder than the lie I lived for those 3 months of marriage and 8 months of courtship. Love, when it's one-sided, isn't love at all. It's a story you tell yourself about someone else, a fairy tale where you're both the hero and the fool, and the ending is always the same because you're the only one who believes in the story while everyone else is just reading from a different script entirely. I still miss her sometimes, but I'm learning to miss the right things and ignore the parts that were never real anyway. I miss the dream of having a family again, of mattering to people who needed me as much as I needed them, of building something lasting with someone who saw the same future I did stretching out ahead of us like a road we'd travel together. I don't miss the walking on eggshells, the constant worry that I was saying the wrong thing or asking too many questions, the feeling that I was always auditioning for a role in my own marriage, performing the part of the generous husband while she performed the part of the grateful wife. I don't miss the anxiety that came with loving someone who could disappear at any moment, who treated my presence like a privilege she could revoke without warning or explanation. The most expensive story I ever bought cost me 12,000 Australian dollars and 3 months of thinking I'd finally figured out how to be happy. But at least now I know the difference between a love that costs something and a love that's worth something, between someone who sees you as a person and someone who sees you as a bank account with emotions attached. If you're a man my age reading this, if you're lonely enough to believe that love can still find you in places where everything is different and everyone is younger and more beautiful than the life you left behind, just remember this one thing. The heart that's desperate to believe will always find reasons to ignore what the mind can see clearly. That doesn't make you stupid or weak or deserving of whatever happens to you. It just makes you human, makes you someone who still has hope, despite evidence that hope is dangerous when it's not matched by wisdom. But maybe, just maybe, it also makes you wise enough to ask the right questions before you sell your most precious possessions for someone else's dream of what you might be worth to them. Maybe it makes you careful enough to distinguish between love and need, between partnership and parasitism, between someone who wants to build a life with you and someone who just wants to use your life as scaffolding for their own construction project. The hardest lesson I've learned is that real love doesn't require you to prove it with money, doesn't demand that you liquidate your past to fund their future, doesn't make you feel like you're constantly failing some test you didn't know you were taking. Real love, the kind I thought I'd found but was actually just a high-quality imitation, doesn't leave you wondering if any of it was ever genuine or if you were just a convenient solution to problems that existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you're gone. Real love doesn't disappear overnight like smoke, doesn't communicate through lawyers, doesn't reduce years of what you thought was intimacy to a single cold email that treats you like a business transaction that's finally concluded. The woman I loved never existed except in carefully curated moments designed to keep me invested, keep me transferring money, keep me believing in a future that was never on her calendar. She was an actress playing a role, and I was an audience of one, applauding a performance that was always meant to end with me alone in an empty theater, wondering how I'd mistaken professional competence for genuine affection. Every I love you was a line from a script, written by desperation, and performed by someone who understood that lonely men my age will pay premium prices for the illusion of being needed, of mattering, of finally finding someone who sees past our gray hair and pension statements to the men we used to be when we still believed in happy endings. But here's what I want you to understand. What I wish someone had told me before I boarded that first flight to the Philippines with flowers and dreams and a heart full of hope that had nowhere safe to land. Being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being with someone who sees you as a resource instead of a person, who measures your worth by your bank balance instead of your character, who treats your love like a renewable energy source they can tap until it's depleted, that's worse than any loneliness you think you can't survive. I spent 5 years after my divorce believing that solitude was a problem that needed solving, that my empty house was evidence of some fundamental failure on my part, that happiness was something other people possessed, and I needed to acquire through the right relationship, with the right person who would finally make me feel complete. Now, I know that completeness isn't something another person can give you, especially not someone who sees you as incomplete in ways that conveniently require their expensive assistance to fix. Happiness isn't a destination you reach by selling everything you've built and starting over in someone else's country, with someone else's problems and someone else's definition of what your life should look like. Happiness, the real kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's performance or approval, starts with accepting that you're enough, as you are, that your value doesn't increase or decrease based on whether someone young and beautiful decides you're worth keeping around. The nights are the hardest part now, when the silence in my apartment feels heavy instead of peaceful, when I catch myself reaching for my phone to call someone who was never really there to begin with. Sometimes I dream about Mika, about teaching her to drive or helping with her homework or walking her down an aisle someday, and I wake up mourning a relationship with a child who was never really my daughter, who was just another prop in a production designed to make me believe I was finally part of something larger than my own loneliness. Sometimes I dream about Reynold, but not the woman who left without a word, the woman who reduced our marriage to legal paperwork and asset division. I dream about the woman from our video calls, the one who laughed at my terrible pronunciation and told me stories about her life and made me feel like I was worth the international phone charges and time zone calculations. But that woman was never real, and mourning her is like mourning a character from a movie you loved until you found out it was all special effects and green screens, until you realized that what moved you was just someone else's technical competence at creating believable illusions. The real Reynold, the one who planned my emotional and financial extraction with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor, she's probably already moved on to her next project, her next lonely man with a pension and a need to feel useful, her next performance of gratitude and love, and forever promises that will last exactly as long as it takes to access whatever resources she needs to solve whatever problems existed before he arrived and will continue after he's discarded. I don't hate her for it, which surprises me sometimes when I'm honest about my feelings instead of performing the role of the bitter ex-husband for people who think I should be angrier than I am. She was desperate in ways I'll never fully understand, facing pressures and responsibilities and cultural expectations that my comfortable Australian retirement could never prepare me to comprehend. She had a daughter to raise and a mother to support, and a future to secure in a country where women my age don't have the luxury of pension checks and empty houses they can sell to fund romantic adventures. She saw an opportunity, and she took it, executed a plan with the kind of ruthless efficiency that survival requires when you don't have the safety net of first-world privilege to catch you when you fall. What I hate is how easily I let myself believe that desperation could transform into love, that someone's need for what I could provide was the same thing as wanting who I actually was. I hate how quickly I abandoned my own instincts, my own questions, my own reasonable concerns about the speed and intensity of our relationship because I wanted so badly to believe that love could still find me after 64 years of mostly getting it wrong. I hate that I confused being useful with being loved, that I thought solving someone else's problems was the same thing as building a partnership, that I believed financial generosity was the same thing as emotional intimacy. The money doesn't matter now. Not really. 12,000 Australian dollars isn't going to make or break my retirement, isn't going to determine whether I can afford groceries or medicine or a decent place to live for whatever years I have left. What matters is that I paid $12,000 to learn that I'd rather be alone with my dignity than coupled with someone who sees my dignity as something for sale. What matters is that I finally understand the difference between loneliness and solitude, between wanting someone and needing someone, between love that enhances your life and love that requires you to sacrifice your life for the privilege of being tolerated. The old man I was when I first logged into that language exchange website, desperate and lonely, and convinced that happiness was something other people possessed that I needed to acquire through the right combination of effort and luck and willingness to start over. He was wrong about almost everything. But he wasn't wrong about deserving love, about being worthy of someone's genuine affection, about having something valuable to offer beyond his bank account and his willingness to solve other people's financial emergencies. He just needed to learn that real love doesn't cost anything except the courage to be vulnerable with someone who's earned the privilege of seeing who you really are, underneath all the ways you try to make yourself useful to others. These days I wake up when my body wants to wake up instead of when someone else's schedule requires it. I drink my coffee as slowly as I want, read books that interest me instead of ones that might help me understand a culture I was never really invited to join. I talk to other expats who've learned similar lessons through similar mistakes, and we don't spend much time feeling sorry for ourselves because we're all still here, still breathing, still capable of building something meaningful from whatever pieces of ourselves survived our various disasters. The truth that took me 64 years and one catastrophic marriage to learn is this: you can't love someone into loving you back, can't pay someone to want you, can't solve your way into someone's heart by making yourself indispensable to their survival. Love, the real kind that actually lasts and actually matters, doesn't require you to prove anything or pay anything or change anything fundamental about who you are. It just requires you to be brave enough to let someone see you clearly and patient enough to wait for someone who likes what they see, not what you can do for them or buy for them or fix for them. And if that person never comes, if you spend your remaining years learning to be content with your own company and your own choices and your own small daily pleasures, that's not failure or tragedy or evidence that you're somehow defective. That's just life, real life, the kind that doesn't always end with wedding videos and forever promises and the illusion that finding the right person will solve all the problems that existed before they arrived and will remain after they leave. Sometimes life ends with a man in a small apartment in a foreign country, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise and feeling grateful that he finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between surviving and thriving, between love that costs everything and love that's actually worth the price of admission. The car I sold to fund my heartbreak was beautiful, but she was just metal and chrome and the memory of work that gave my hands purpose when my heart was empty. The marriage I bought with her sale price was expensive, but it taught me things about myself and love and the difference between need and want that no amount of money could have purchased any other way. I'm not grateful for the pain, but I'm grateful for the education, grateful for the clarity that only comes from having your assumptions shattered completely and being forced to rebuild your understanding of yourself from whatever pieces survived the destruction. This is my story, my confession, my warning, and my gift to any man who recognizes himself in my mistakes and my loneliness and my desperate willingness to believe that love was something he could purchase with good intentions and financial generosity. We deserve better than that. We deserve love that doesn't require us to liquidate our lives to prove our worth, relationships that enhance rather than exploit our natural desire to be useful and needed and valued. And if we never find that love, if we finish our days alone but intact, that's still better than finishing them coupled but depleted, married but empty, surrounded by people who see us as solutions rather than souls. The sunrise in Dumaguete is beautiful every morning, and no one needs to validate my appreciation of it or charge me for the privilege of witnessing it. That's enough for now. That has to be enough.